incredible. It really does feel incredible because I remember, going to work every day. I had to take like an hour and a half train ride to get to Howard University from Virginia. And I would study. I would study on the train all the way to, that was like 3 hours of studying right there. And then 1 hour when I got back home. So I remember I always thought that I just want to do residency and then I'm going to be done. Like I can't do this. This is a lot of work. And then I was done with the residency. And I think this is a lot of us IMGs. For me, I knew that I wanted to work in the residency program in the United States and become a physician in the United States. But that's where my dreams ended. I never thought beyond that. And I remember during residency, my program director was the one who kept saying, well, why don't you want to do a fellowship? And why don't you want to teach? And we had to do some sort of teaching with the students who were with us. And she would always say, well, you're a good teacher. Why don't you get more involved with the students? Why don't you make the students' curriculum? And she pushed me until she was a critical care physician herself. And I ended up applying to critical care.
The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the IMG Roadmap podcast. Guys, I'm so excited about today's guest because she's not only an IMG, but she's an IMG who has now achieved ranks in academics as a program director. And I believe that she has a lot of good, valuable information for you, especially as you go on your interview cycle and as you process your applications and submit onto IRAS. So I want to welcome Dr. Amira Mohamed to the podcast today. How are you doing today, doctor?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the beautiful introduction. I'm very happy to be here. And I hope I can give you some useful information today.
I'm confident that you come with a lot of useful information. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you an IMG. Why would you define yourself as an IMG?
So I studied in Khartoum, Sudan. That's where I'm from. And that's where I went to medical school. Shortly after graduating, I decided to move here to the United States. But at the time, nobody I knew really did that. I heard about medicine in the United States, but I didn't really know the pathway. So, it took a lot of research on my own to figure out how to take the exams, what is expected in these exams, how to study for the exams, and finally how to apply for residency. Even, residency programs, what makes a residency program good versus what makes it bad. And depending on, what you want to achieve in your career, what kind of residency program would be best for me. I really did not have that information at that time. And I think it took me some time to figure it out. I'm still figuring a lot out now, but my hope is to give other IMGs and other people who are coming from different countries a little bit of advice as to what to look for. And I think different things apply for different people and different things work for different people. But just knowing that you do have options and to be careful about the choices that you make because they will affect you in the long run. And hopefully, I think there's so many opportunities in the US, especially for doctors. And us being international medical graduates who are getting to know the system later on in life may give us a little bit of a disadvantage. So we have to use a lot of that time to kind of educate ourselves and what options do we have and what are the best options for us.
Yeah, I love that you said that there are so many options for us, but information is where there's a gap. Information and knowledge. And then sometimes we have this information, we have the knowledge, but then execution, it becomes a problem. So I really love that. Because that summarizes how I feel as well about IMGs. There are opportunities, whether in clinical medicine or outside of clinical medicine, there are opportunities, but information and knowledge and then execution is where the problem comes in. So in your intro, you're from Sudan, I'm from Cameroon, and this feels like an African reunion.
That's exciting.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So where do you work now? What roles do you carry? Can you give us some perspective on that?
Sure. So right now I work in the Bronx in New York in Montefiore Medical Center, which is part of the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I am the program director for the Critical Care Medicine Fellowship. So what I did is I did a 3-year internal medicine residency program, after which I did a 2-year critical care medicine fellowship program. And then I've been attending here for a few years. I was associate program director for a little bit, and now I'm the program director of the fellowship program. So the fellowship program, it's 18 fellows, and they come from different backgrounds. Some of them haven't done fellowship. Some of them have done, for example, pulmonary or renal or some sort of fellowship beforehand. But basically, they all come together and spend about 2 years in the ICU and end up graduating as intensivists. The other thing that I'm also doing is working with the residency program as part of the clinical core competency committee, and also with the medical school program with the teaching over there at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So I really dedicated a lot of time towards education. And obviously, primarily, I work with the fellows, but I do work a lot with the residents as well. And I do work with the students. So I try to think of my career as mostly dedicated to education with a little bit of research and a little bit of quality improvement as being part of the ICU and things like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think at the end of the day, having been a resident before and being a fellow, and even if you continue your career in academics, you have first-hand experience in general as to what our audience right now is looking forward to, whether it's as a resident, as a fellow, and then also as someone who makes decisions for these trainees. So I want us to delve a little bit back into your story some more. Can you tell us about your journey from Khartoum, Sudan, to your first residency position?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it took me about 9 months, I would say, from the time it took me about a year from the time I decided to move to the U.S. to complete the USMLEs and apply for the residency program. So during that year, I actually moved to the U.S. So I had the opportunity to come here. I did one of the courses in Washington, D.C. that prepares you for taking step 1. After I finished, I remember taking the first exam and thinking, should I go back to Sudan or should I stay here? And the only issue that I had was that I felt like I did not know what the application process was like. I felt like ERS was so complicated. I didn't know what a token was. How do I buy a token? What does that mean? So I decided that it was best for me to be surrounded by other people who were in the same path as me rather than go back. So I decided to stay here. I tried to find a job. I worked a little bit at, some education and helping other IMGs find a way to take their exams. But I also applied to a very nice African man, actually, who was a gastroenterologist at Howard University Hospital. And he needed a medical assistant. And I remember he went out of his way to make me his medical assistant. So what I would do is that I would work 9 to 5 and I would go back home when I study for my exam. But that kind of supported me, and that I was able to rent a room and survive in Washington, D.C. But also I was meeting a lot of other physicians, and I was meeting a lot of American graduates, IMGs, who were giving me advice. This is the score that you need in order to get this, or what do you want to apply for? And remember, at that time, I had no idea what specialty I even wanted. I remember I was thinking OB, and then I was thinking, I kept going back and forth between the different specialties. But what I did the most is talk to people. I talked to so many people who have made it, people who were residents, people who were applying, and they gave me such good advice. And I think that when I was in Sudan, all I could hear, I would hear people say is, oh, that person went to the US because they got like 250 or 260 in their steps. But when I came here, I figured out that that's not why people matched. People matched because they worked really hard, not just studying, but they actually focused their whole application and dedicated it towards something that they felt passionate about. And now that I'm reviewing applications, you can see that come through. You can see somebody's application that, okay, they've dedicated so much effort into becoming a critical care fellow or into becoming an internal medicine resident. And you can see that go, shine through the application. And I got advice from so many people, and this is how you should make your application look like. When you're choosing your letter writers, really, what do you want your letter writers to highlight about you? And I remember I had a couple of letter writers from Sudan who had no idea what they were doing. It's the first time they write a letter. We don't really do that. Remember, I had to sit with them and say, they said the language in the letter is really, really important. And this is one of the things that I think can make or break you. When you choose your letter writer, make sure you choose somebody who knows your good qualities, who's going to highlight your good qualities. So, for example, I remember I was reading a letter of recommendation, and this is part of the critical care medicine fellowship. So I need somebody who's going to, work hard, who's going to have, you need to work with a team in the ICU. It's a very intense environment. And I have letter writers who tell me this person's really caring. She cares about people's feelings. And that's nice. And I really, I like that. I want that. But I also want to hear about how this person's really determined. I want to hear about how they're really passionate about critical care, how they're going to dedicate their time. So you need to explain to your letter writers what kind of specialty you're applying for. What are the letter readers looking for? And what qualities you have that can really be shown in the letter of recommendation. So that's such good advice about how to prepare my application, choosing my letter writers, writing my personal statement. What should I really highlight in the personal statement? I got really good advice about how to study. I had no idea how to study and what to study from. So I remember, getting advice on first of all, time was a major issue for me in taking my exam. So I got advice about how to manage my time, that no matter how much you study and how much you practice, that first 1 or 2 blocks, you're not going to finish. Yeah. And if somebody hadn't told me that, I would have panicked inside my exam. I had at least 10 questions in my first block of questions, my first exam that I took, that because I was so nervous, I kept reading and rereading the questions and rereading the questions. And by the time finished, I still had 10 questions that I had never seen. And this is something that that had never happened to me. In months I'd been practicing and I knew how to manage my time. But here I am, panicking on the day of my exam. But they told me that. They told me you're going to panic. You're not going to finish the first few blocks. Don't let it frustrate you. Don't let it deter you from finishing your exam and doing your best afterwards. And if I hadn't gotten that piece of advice, I would have probably not made it through the exam. So I think this is one of the most important things is talk to somebody who's been through the exam before. Talk to somebody who's been through ERAS and applying for a residency program. Especially talk to the different specialties when you're making that decision. And I know some people apply for different specialties at different times, but just make sure that the way that you assign each of your documents shows, primary interest in that specialty. Otherwise, you might not get either, right? Like if I see somebody who's saying I'm into internal medicine, but also, pathology, I sometimes think about it. I'm probably not going to interview that person and the pathologist is not going to interview that person. Mm-hmm. So I don't usually recommend applying for 2 specialties, but if you have to do that, just make sure you really, really organize yourself so you don't make that type of mistake. Applying on time is important, but if you apply late, you can always send an email. And I like sending emails, especially at least the programs that I care about in terms of location and saying, some of my documents were not complete. I would appreciate if you look at my documents now, they're now complete and give me a chance. Obviously, never apply too late, but if you do apply late, this is something that you can do and email the program directors, the program coordinators, and letting them know that you sent your application in. But the application process itself, I think once you start getting the interviews, you should really plan how you're going to go about your interview cycle. And now a lot of the interviews are virtual. For us in critical care, all of the interviews are virtual. So you get a chance to, I hate saying the word practice, but basically your first couple of interviews are going to be practice interviews, at least 1 or 2, especially if this is your first interview ever, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, this was my first interview ever, my first interview in English, my first interview as a physician in the United States. So always pick a place that I'm not going to say you're not interested in, but don't pick your most important place or the place that you really, really want to go to as your first interview. Absolutely. Make it a little bit so that if you make a mistake or if you get nervous, and you will, that you don't start beating yourself up. And you'll notice that as the interview cycle goes on, the more and more confident you're going to be and more comfortable you're going to be. So these important places that you really want to end up in, try to make them later. And then finally, be careful about what you ask in your interview. Everybody wants to know what the schedule is like. And I always tell the applicants, this is what the schedule is like. It's a tough schedule. I don't mind them asking me, how much do you work and stuff like that. But sometimes all the fellowships and residencies, you get to meet the residents and you get to meet the fellows. And there's some questions that you can ask the fellows and the residents. In fact, they'll probably better answer these questions.
Yeah.
Because even though we make the schedule, we really don't know what it feels like, right? Because I haven't been in fellowship in a while, so I really don't know what it feels like to work 6 days in a row nonstop. So they can better tell you about the schedule. And when somebody keeps asking me, for example, about this schedule or how much time off they have, I understand this is a priority for them. And it was a priority for me when I was interviewing. But it sometimes does come across as, I don't really want to work that hard. So just be mindful of the type of questions that you ask when somebody asks, what questions do you have for me about the program? For example, for my program, I like when people ask me about the different ICUs and what kind of cases they see in an ICU. Are there any rare cases that I have seen? Is there anything that I'm planning for the fellows to add to their curriculum in the next year? This shows that this person's interested in education, interested in furthering their career, interested in their procedures, for example. But when they start asking me about how many days off and things like that, even though we both know it's a concern of theirs, it just comes across as this is their number one priority, which it really shouldn't be. So be mindful of the questions you ask the program directors or your interviewers, and make sure you show interest. And if you really want to know some of the answers is this place toxic? Because these are very good questions, but they're better asked to the fellows and the residents who will be a lot more honest and a lot more direct.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I mean, just great tips. I was just absorbing it all like a sponge. And hopefully everyone listening, you had your notepads out and you were taking some notes because Dr. Amira Mohamed is teaching today. So let's go over some things. You said a lot of really great stuff that I want to reiterate because, as you know, in medical education, what do? We tell the learner what they want to learn, and then we tell them what we just taught them, right? So let's do that over again. All right. So you started off actually something I was going to pinpoint is I also came into the US to do an educational program for step 1. And I lived in the DMV. So you were speaking and I'm like, what year did you move here? Because we would have been in that area about the same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was here in 2012. So
wow. That's amazing. So I started residency in 2012, but I went through that process in 2008. 2009. That was my season in Kaplan and living, in and out of places, but we'll get into that a whole different day. But yeah, that's really cool that you said that. And another thing that you said that really struck me was regarding the letters of recommendation. And I don't know if you noticed, but I do have like an educational program that I created because there are all these nuances that nobody teaches you in medical school, especially because we're all from different medical schools. But one of the key things that you mentioned, which is absolutely on the money and on the point, is I actually tell my students, if you remember doing some clinically significant work with your preceptors in medical school, write that down on a Word document. Keep a notepad of every activity, achievement that you did. You worked on this person with research. And when you're requesting your letter, send that in your email to them and say, you remember I did this and this and this and this with you. Can you speak about those things? Because I'm finally now applying into GYN. If you were the one scrubbing in on all the C-sections and participating on the gynecological procedures with him in the office, highlight that. Let him talk about how you work, your technical skill in the OR on those 2, 3, 4, 5 times that you worked with him or her, and let them put that in your letter. As opposed to you're a nice person, you're a caring person. Yeah, that's great. But how are you going to function in the OR, right? How are you going to function when that'll be emergency? And this example translates to every specialty. So I really like that you brought that up because in my day, I have seen some letters and I'm just like, what in the world? Exactly. So yes, definitely room for opportunity for improvement there for everyone requesting LORs during the season. Personal statement, to your point, I loved it. We need to be able to document our commitment to the specialty without telling the program director everything about their specialty, right? Because you're the specialist in critical care. I'm not. I call you when I have an ICU patient like, hey, we need you down here. So it will be really abysmal for me to sit down and tell you about critical care, right? I should be instead, as an applicant, expressing the qualities and attributes and stories of my life that bring out a passion for critical care. Exactly. Because that's what you want to know. So the next point, interview. The kind of questions that you're asking your program directors and residents, you should be very careful about your audience. And I think that's a big mistake IMGs make is we don't understand the audience. And it's not our fault because we didn't train here. Mm-hmm. It's not the medical system we're familiar with. It's not the language we're taught medicine in for some of us. And so it's a different society. It's a different culture. And in many ways, there is a culture that we need to learn. And there is an assimilation and a acculturation that needs to happen. And that translates in how we interview too, because if we don't know who we're talking to or what their role is or how programs function, and we may ask not the incorrect questions because they're not incorrect, but we may ask the question to the wrong audience.
Exactly.
And so it's important to make a difference, talk to people, be a part of communities and groups that are uplifting, not negative, negative Nancy's that are going to tell you how this is impossible, but pick and choose who your influences are. So guys, you heard Dr. Mohamed. She went through LOR's personal statement, her personal experience, and even working as a medical assistant. And now you're a program director. Tell me, how does that feel?
It feels incredible. It really does feel incredible because I remember, going to work every day. I had to take like an hour and a half train ride to get to Howard University from Virginia. And I would study on the train all the way to, that was like 3 hours of studying right there. And then 1 hour when I got back home. So I remember I always thought that I just want to do residency and then I'm going to be done. Like I can't do this. This is a lot of work. And then I was done with the residency. And I think this is a lot of us IMGs. For me, I knew that I wanted to work in the residency program in the United States and become a physician in the United States. But that's where my dreams ended. I never thought beyond that. And I remember during residency, my program director was the one who kept saying, well, why don't you want to do a fellowship? And why don't you want to teach? And we had to do some sort of teaching with the students who were with us. And she would always say, well, you're a good teacher. Why don't you get more involved with the students? Why don't you make the students' curriculum? And she pushed me until she was a critical care physician herself. And I ended up applying to critical care. During my critical care fellowship, my program director again kept saying, well, what are you going to do? And I told him, I just want to work in an ICU, whatever shifts I have, and then go home. And he says, you can do more than that. You can teach, you can do this, you can do that. And he kept suggesting things for me. And I think for me, that was the first time I realized it's not about a job. Because once you get into residency, it doesn't end there. Now you're guaranteed that you're going to have a job as a physician. But what a lot of us want, but we don't realize it, is a career as a physician. And having a career is very different. Having a career meaning having a passion and giving back. And whether it's, there's so many careers in medicine that you can be in education. We hear a lot about people in education because these are the people who are teaching us. These are our mentors. But you can also have a career in research. You can also have a career in admin, become a part of the quality improvement projects and become a director. You can become a CMO. There's so much potential, not just potential in terms of having financially, you can become, one of the most successful physicians in the world. But I think we limit ourselves because we realize these things late. One of the things that I noticed is that all the AMGs know when they go in that I'm most likely going to either apply to this fellowship or that fellowship, or I'm not going to apply for fellowship. This is what I'm going to do, but I want to be part of the residency program, or I'm really into research. I'm actually going to take a year where I'm just going to do research. And I had, some of our co-fellows do that. I was thinking, when did you decide all this? Well, they had time when we were trying to figure out what a letter of recommendation is, what a token is, what ERAS is. Everybody else was planning what they're going to do after residency. They'd never had the concerns that we had. Am I going to match? Am I even going to be a physician in the US? No, they were planning beyond that. And I think as soon as you go into residency, you need to start thinking, what opportunities does my residency program have that I can take advantage of? And some residency programs allow you, if they're part of a university, to do some sort of courses with the public school. You can do some coding courses as part of your research project. There's so much that you can do if you want to be a researcher, if you want to be in education, that by the time you graduate from residency, your CV is going to be a stunning CV, even if you do not want to do fellowship. But you have to decide, do I just want to be a physician with a job, which is not a bad thing. But I hate for us to realize too late that actually I want to do a little bit more. I want to teach, or I want to.
Options.
Exactly. And there are options out there that once you get into residency, you need to start working on right away.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that. 100%. 100%. And these options exist even prior to residency. Like the things that you pick and choose to do prior to your application also can speak to your commitment to that specialty that you're applying into, whether that is a paid position or an unpaid position, a research position. You can gear them toward your specialty. You're interested in neurology? Well, make your work around the neurosciences, right? Like that would fit in. And I think a lot of us, even after residency, don't realize how much potential that we have. That is true. I mean, I share with everything you just said. I was able to finish residency, start practicing as a hospitalist, and then in that moment, encountered another IMG who was in the C-suite. And one day I was walking down the hallway and I asked, and I just thought, I was like, I'm interested in quality work, but I have no experience, never learned of this in residency. Where do I start? And I walked up to him and I'm like, hey, Mahmoud, like, how did you get into quality? And he was like, are you going to HSM? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to. It's just like, okay, attend all the quality sessions there. And when I have stuff down in the office, I'll let you know. And it just started as a mentoring relationship. There was never a moment where we sat down and I was like, hey, Cameron, you are my mentor, right? But that's what it was. And in many ways, that's what you experience with your attendings in residency who are able to see some qualities in you and then develop that or help you kind of see yourself in a different light. And so over the course of time, I started shadowing him in the office. The next thing I know, he's leaving for ID fellowship. And he's like, we need a new quality person down here. They're like, come on to, they invite me to this office meeting in admin one day. And they're like, oh, we have this position that's going to open up. Are you interested? And I'm floored because something that started off as easy as an idea in the hallway of the hospital, and then vocalizing that to someone like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what does it take to be a physician that does this? Translated into attending conferences, learning about the item in question, because it could be anything else. And then being in a position where you start to volunteer time into it, and then you're considered for that position. Mm-hmm. And I served in that position as a chief quality officer for about 2 years. I left because I was choosing to go back into fellowship training. But that, in a sense, just highlighted to me how much potential there is out there and how many opportunities there are. Oh, but we don't know them because we're not exposed to them. And a lot of times having mentorship or sponsorship, people who actually put you in these positions, makes a big difference. Yeah. And in many ways, you shared that today in having that sponsor that offered you that medical assistant position and went beyond out of himself to make it possible. Because from there, we start to see what's possible. We start to see opportunities and variations of how people practice and what's out here. And then you get into residency and you have preceptors that are able to see your gift and see your passion and help you grow into that. And then that translates in your fellowship. And now you're in this position. And I think our network as IMGs makes a big difference as well. Mm-hmm. Who we associate with, who we learn from, the people we allow to influence us. Because I believe very strongly, if you had been in a position where you were influenced by people who had failed along the journey, it would be very different.
It would be. I agree. Yeah. And it's exactly what you said. Mentorship is so important because I think without my program directors and the people that I worked with, I would not know the opportunities that I had or the options that I had. And I'm not saying everybody has to do something with whatever but everybody should get to know what opportunities they have when they get the chance to do that. And the chance to do that is residency. The first year, I always say, the first year is for us to survive. The first year is for us to get used to the culture, to get used to the EHR, to get used to all that. But after that, then we should start thinking. And, I remember this advice that I got from our program director. She said, look at one of the people that you think that they have a good lifestyle that you can live with, a lifestyle that you appreciate, and, somebody who you think can be a role model for you, and walk up to that person and ask them, how did you get to where you are? And I remember she was the one because I enjoyed seeing her teach the residents and then go and teach the fellows and then teach the medical students. And she actually got protected time to do what she does. So she worked less shifts than everybody else. But when she was in the unit, everybody else enjoyed having her around. But her work-life balance was great. And I remember just thinking, all right, this is what I want to do. And I asked her and she goes, when you're applying for fellowship and when you're applying for a job, it needs to be clear that you're interested in education. This is what you want to do. So work with the medical students, work with the residents when you're a senior resident, work, create a curriculum, be a resident representative, make sure your CV speaks for itself as in, I am interested in being a leader in education, and this is what I want to do, and then continue along that path. And there was an option for me to be interested in that, try it out, and not like it. Right. And this is actually not for me, but I tried it and it's not for me. But for us to feel, I wish I would have tried this when I was in fellowship or when I was in residency. I wish I had done more quality. I have no idea what quality is. I think that would be a real loss because there are so many opportunities out there and they're not hard. Just like you said right now, it's really not hard. You can walk up to anybody who you consider, a friend or a coworker, and there's always work to do. There's always a quality improvement project. There's always an educational project, and people appreciate the help. So try it out. Make sure that you are aware of everything that your program has to offer, and pick something that works for you or not. Or if you just don't want to focus on your shift work and do that, that's fine too. There's no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fundamental sort of underlying thing that I want our audience to hear today is there is good in finding your passion, and your career has to mesh in with that passion. And everybody's different. Your passion may be, like you said, to work in the clinic and go home and not have to do a call. Your passion may be in research. Your passion may be in something else. But don't shortchange yourself because you're an IMG, for one. Two, I always say this to my students, don't rule yourself out before you get ruled out by the system.
Yeah.
Give yourself opportunity to be exposed to different things, to learn different things. Be a sponge. Be open. Be welcoming of new ideas and new ways that you can grow and develop yourself. Because at the end of the day, this is my personal belief, but I believe that we're all on some type of journey. And the journey really has very little to do with our career. It has more to do with who we are as a human being. And so on this journey, our career is just one part of it. But your journey is going to it's going to have so much meaning for you if it meshes in with why you're here and why you're walking this journey on earth. And so your career, your family, your passions, your hobbies, when they all tie in and they sync themselves in some form of fashion, it becomes a really beautiful dance and your journey is so pleasant. But a lot of times you will know how to make this journey work for you. And then you live an unhappy life, not because you weren't able to have more. And it's really not about material more. It's about being able to express and achieve those things that are in your heart.
Yeah.
And sometimes for us, that's teaching in academics. It's developing the future doctors.
Mm-hmm.
It's giving back to the next generation that's going to go out and be different things for different people. And that's your passion. But for the other IMG, it may be something completely different. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you need to expose yourself to options. You need to learn. You need to be out there, putting yourself out there and just absorbing like a sponge, because there's so much information, good information, not bad information, so much good information that you can absorb and learn from. I've really enjoyed speaking with you today, Dr. Muhammad, and I hope that this is just one of many future collaborations that we can do together.
I really hope so. This has been great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I really do appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Now, usually on my podcast, a lot of people want to be able to ask the guests or my guest host some questions or communicate with them. And we're big on social media in the IMG roadmap world. Is there a Twitter account that we can follow? Is there? Yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, so I do have an active Twitter account. I'm on Instagram, but usually Twitter is where I communicate with the medical community the most. So I'll definitely share with you my Twitter handle, and I'd love to answer any questions or help in any way I can.
So can you just tell us what it is, and then we'll have it in show notes as well?
It's Amira Mohamed, MD.
Okay.
Amira Mohamed, MD.
Okay. All right. So I'll just make sure I highlight your name on the screen as well. It's Amira Mohamed, MD. Yes. On Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I always tell my students in the IMG Roadmap course, if you want to find a program director, go to Twitter. Yes. They're all on Twitter and they're all telling you what they want you to know, especially right around it. Because I think of it like, if I was a program director, I want my job to be easier. I want my applicants to come in with everything that I want. So it's an easier season.
Exactly.
So that's what the program directors are doing. They're giving you the information so that you don't have to bring a lot of work on their table.
Yeah.
And I tell students this, but sometimes it's hard. You think
a lot of applicants actually contact me and tell me, look at my CV, whether it's through Twitter or through email. And I'm happy when I receive this because I know this person's genuinely interested, not necessarily specifically in my program, but at least they're interested enough to go out and try to figure out who they're supposed to contact. So I don't always respond, but I 100% of the time go back and look at the application and see, what I like and what I don't.
Oh, wow. I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that because that's one question I get all the time. So in my course, when I teach my students, I tell them, sometimes you reach out to programs and they don't respond. It's not that they haven't read what you've written. They just can't respond to everyone. It's just not realistic. But trust me, they're reading. They're seeing your email.
And I have a little list because sometimes, I'm really busy and I get the email, but I write the name down or I write the AMC ID and I'm like, okay, this person emailed me. I need to look at this application later. It does show interest, and it doesn't mean that you have to email everybody. But if your application's incomplete, or sometimes if you just have not received the response from this program, then writing out an email could be better. It's not going to harm you. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And to be honest, when I was interviewing for residency, I interviewed for Family Med residency in 2011. And I applied to many programs, many. I don't remember how many. And I remember getting 2 interviews only. And even those 2 interviews, I had a visa problem. I didn't have a great step 1 score. My step 2 was good, but step 1 just took me down the drain. And I remember calling programs that I hadn't heard from. And one of the programs I called, which is where I eventually matched after, a long relationship of networking with them. But that call, I believe, helped me get on the interview list because they said they told me, we've pulled your application out and we're still reviewing it. We'll get back to you. And I was just like, well, if they've looked at my application, why haven't they called me already? But I think that call pushed someone to say, okay, extend that invitation. Yeah. And then I went on that and I was just like, this is where I'm going to go. But so there's something to be said about communication. On that hand, though, I think we should also caution people about how to communicate because there is doing too much. I believe that there is doing too much. Yeah, I believe there's becoming a pest. I really believe it because I get emails all the time and I can tell who is serious and who isn't. So your language in your communication is important just as much as what you're communicating. How you communicate is important. And respect, 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 respect. There is a culture of demand and persistence, which is great. But I think that there should be respect given to your audience, whether it's in time, in allowing them space to respond when they can. And I often say in giving them a way out. Okay. Like give people the grace to say no.
Yeah.
It's perfectly okay. You're not going to hear a yes from everyone, and that's okay. But from the people you hear yes from, those are the people that you will potentially have opportunity to build a relationship with.
Yeah.
So, not to take much of your time because I know you have to go back to the clinic or to the ICU and round and maybe review applications today, but we really appreciate having you on. It's been my pleasure and I hope to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope so. I really hope we can do this again. It's been great for me too. I always think about ways that I can help, not just IMGs, all applicants. I know it's a very nerve-wracking experience to apply, whether to residency or to fellowship. And I really hope that this advice people find useful. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohamed.
Thank you.